All right. Let's go. We'll start with Jordan in Monterey. How are you?
Awesome. How you guys doing?
Good.
Pretty good.
Excellent. So I have a couple of questions ranging from, I went with my girlfriend to see her family in Denver over the holidays, and they are a very religious family. However, they're also extraordinarily intelligent. Her sister's husband is a university professor, and so basically the whole time was all kinds of existential and theological discussions. The most interesting things in terms of what I heard in terms of apologetics that I wanted to hear what you guys had to say about was regarding how we can really know anything in the first place. Because it seemed like a lot of the points he was making to counter whatever it was that we were saying was that somehow saying that you can really know things empirically with solid evidence is some sort of rhetorical trap, and that there is all this larger body of knowledge out there besides that. Mainly he brought up the philosophy of Thomas Nagel, which I haven't read myself. I've read some articles on him. I'm wondering if you guys could talk about that real quick.
Well, I hear this a lot, this idea of how can you really know anything? And it's a big question that I have an interest in, but it doesn't really matter because what we're talking about isn't a requirement of knowledge. It's about what you believe and whether or not your beliefs are rationally justified. So I'd have to know, what do they mean by knowledge? Are they talking about absolute certainty? Because that's a big red herring that I don't care anything at all about, because we don't wait until we're absolutely certain to call something knowledge, and we don't wait until we have knowledge to act. We act in accordance with our beliefs. And so I'm more concerned with what you actually believe and why you believe it. Do you have good reasons? Not whether or not you call it knowledge or you think that it counts as knowledge or it's absolute certain, because we don't have to get that far. So I don't see what the problem is if people, inevitably when they say, ask these questions about how can you really know anything, it's a way of diverting from the fact that they're claiming to believe something or in some cases to know something, and offering no justification for it.
Yeah, I was going to say that it's a way of trying to shift the burden onto you so that you're defending a position that you don't actually have to defend. Because they're the ones that are asserting that some God exists or whatever. They have to defend that. And if they're falling back on this like solipsism or something like that as some kind of defense, that's actually not a defense of their position at all. So
it didn't quite feel like that. It was almost like as you sort of cornered people more and more into not being able to defend these positions. It's sort of like nuclear options just blowing up all knowledge.
Yeah.
But what he did offer in terms of whatever positive evidence there was towards their beliefs was he sent us home with a copy of some of Lee Strobel's books, which I'm sure you guys are well familiar with.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're horrible.
In addition to that, a lot of his critiques were he talked a lot about naturalism, and I'm not entirely sure what that is, if that's an actual thing.
So it's two things.
Yeah.
It's two things. There's philosophical naturalism and there's methodological naturalism. And philosophical naturalism is this assertion that nothing but the natural exists. That's not, in my opinion, a defensible position at all, because it is an assertion that nothing but the natural exists, and I don't know how you came up with that. But there's methodological naturalism, which is basically the foundation of science, which is we can only investigate those things within nature. We have no mechanism for investigating things that aren't natural, and so we are going to confine our methodology to the realm of methodological naturalism. And it's not a pronouncement that the supernatural doesn't exist. It's an acknowledgement that because we cannot test for or confirm the supernatural, we're not going to make pronouncements that it is true or isn't true. We're just going to keep operating within this framework. And the curious thing is that for everything that we've found an explanation for, the answer has been natural.
Yeah.
Now, that's still not confirmation that there's nothing supernatural. But it's like I was saying before the show, the James Randi Educational Foundation has a $1 million prize, and they challenge people who make supernatural claims to demonstrate the truth of their claims. But the most they could ever do is demonstrate that, let's say, a psychic who claims that they are getting information from the dead is able to produce accurate information. They can't tell you why. They can't tell you whether it's God, aliens, psychic powers, or the dead, because we don't have the capability of investigating that. So that's the distinction between the naturalism thing. On the subject of how we can really know, for people who go down that road, in addition to what I said before, why not just say, okay, let's both concede for now that we can't know anything, that K-N-O-W becomes a fairly meaningless and useless proposition. Now let's talk about how we can decide what is most reasonable to accept as likely to be true as we go about living our lives. I try to do this. I think it's the foundation of skepticism. I think most people try to do this in most areas, and some people have been conned into not doing this in the area of does a God exist, or any other kind of wooish supernatural claim.
I guess it just seems like the only weakness in that argument would be, how do you define reasonable? Because again, that would be something that someone like who I was arguing with could say that saying that it's reasonable or not reasonable is, again, sort of a rhetorical track based mostly on your own predilections or assertions.
It's not just based on individual predilections and assertions. We have methods and we have consensus in many ways. Yes, is it an absolute discrete, identifiable, we now have 8 bits of evidence and so we're done? No. And each claim is different, because extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence and trivial claims don't. Is it, and it should be obvious to people. The fact that we can't necessarily quantify this is just a bunch of hand waving. Because if I tell you I have 4 pet cats, is that reasonable to accept just on my word alone? Pretty much, because we are convinced that cats exist and that people have cats. Does it change our worldview if we find out I'm wrong? Do I have to change anything about what I already accept if I accept this claim? And if I'm wrong, how big of an impact is it? Virtually none. It's a trivial claim. If we then provide additional evidence, okay, great, now you've got a good justification. If I tell you that I was spirited away by aliens and visited Elvis for a weekend and was returned, and I was temporarily replaced by a clone, and that's why nobody can know any of this, is that reasonable to believe? Well, no, it's a completely different claim. Everything about it is different. Everything about it exceeds the boundaries of what we already accept and understand. And if you were to accept that based on my say-so alone, you would have to change things that you already accept for really good reasons about the universe. It is constantly a comparative process. We are going to contrast this claim with this one. We are going to see, how much evidence is for this. Where you individually draw the line is completely up to you. But where it is actually rational to draw the line isn't just a matter of subjective personal opinion, which is why we can look around at people who are experiencing serious delusions and say, this person has this mental disorder, or even when we don't know, but it's clear that they are not Jesus and they are not actually having a conversation with Moses and Hitler in this little room. And so to protect them and others, we are going to say that it's reasonable to conclude that they are delusional and put them away. The lines may be blurry, but they're not arbitrary. They're not just, it's all subjective. Oh, I'm not crazy. Okay, cool.
Cool. Thanks. One more thing I wanted you guys to talk about before I go off the line is one of the weirder points he made was that during the so-called Dark Ages, that the church or the religion was not all that detrimental to science. That it, all the claims that there was all this repression of scientific ideas, etc., was widely over-exaggerated. And he points to God's Philosophers by James Hannam. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that book. I haven't read it either, but it's something that he sent my way as a support of that assertion. And I was surfing around Iron Chariots to try and see if there was sort of a big list or of the litanies of crimes against science during the so-called Dark Ages, and wasn't able to find anything.
So even if he was correct, so what? What the church did with respect to science has absolutely no bearing on whether or not their claims about the supernatural are true or believable. I don't think that I can't speak to the actual claims because I haven't read the book, But let's say the church was a wonderful supporter of science, who was, it's the only reason that we have science. So what? That tells me nothing at all about whether or not Jesus was God and died for our sins.
Fair enough.
Cool.
All right, thank you guys so much.
Thanks.
Thanks.